So, David Barker, it's over to you. The more things change, jump, 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 dot, dot, dot. Off
Okay,
you.
thank you, Michael, for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me. I'm like so many of us these days. I'm kind of experimenting with new technology all the time. I'm using a feature on Zoom that I discovered yesterday that allows me to use my slides as a background. So if I disappear or my slides disappear, you may have to give me a couple of minutes to rescue myself. But anyway, we're going to be talking. We're going to be talking about change. And I think that in ELT, or I guess in education, really, you could argue that we have too much change, often change for the sake of change. But you could also argue the opposite. You could argue that we don't have enough change because what we do now is still basically the same as what we did 50 years ago. But I think within ELT in particular, there is a tendency for us to have this idea of something new coming in to the field. And that's great. Something new coming in is always good. But what we tend to do is we tend to replace the old with the new. So we'll say, right, this new thing has come along. Everything we did before was rubbish. Let's throw it out and let's jump on the new thing. It's not, it's happened again and again and again in ELT. Michael Swan wrote a paper about the communicative approach back in 1985. It was a two-part paper. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it. But this was a quote from the end of his part two. I'll give you a minute just to read that. And that's the reference below if anybody wants to take a photo of it. Okay, so my favorite phrase from this is the last sentence, this idea that even though we keep changing things, the students basically learn about as much as they did before. I'm not aware, maybe people more informed than me are, but I don't know of any evidence that people learn languages any more efficiently or any better or in any larger numbers today than they did in 1960. I've certainly never seen any evidence of that. And we, in spite of the fact that we have these revolutions and these things, these huge changes that sweep over the profession, it seems like we keep drifting back to the way that we did things before. And this has happened again and again. So an example of this, back in, I think, 1996, I did my diploma in International House in London. And that was the first time I ever saw CALL, computer-assisted language learning. I'm not sure if the computer, to be fair, was quite as bad as the one in this photo, but it was something like this. It was a black screen with green text. By today's standards, it was a joke. But the idea was it was a gap fill exercise, and there was a gap, and the students had to type in the answer, and the computer would tell them whether they were right or wrong. And I was completely blown away by this. I'd never seen anything like it. And I thought, well, this is going to revolutionize the field. I wasn't the only one who thought this. The classrooms of the future are going to be students sitting in front of computers, and they won't need a teacher, or the teacher will just be walking around monitoring. And of course, that didn't happen. I actually thought of an interesting analogy here. And this is with anything new. Do you remember, well, it will depend on your age, but if you're old enough, you will remember the Coke versus Pepsi adverts. I'm getting 1970s or 1980s. The idea was the taste test, and they found that 90% or 99% of people preferred Coca-Cola to Pepsi. And years later, they did research on this, and they found out the problem was that Coke was sweeter. So if you only took one sip, you would prefer the Coke. But if you gave to people a glass of each, people actually preferred the Pepsi. And I think there's a danger of this with anything new. There's kind of that first taste. You think, oh my goodness me, this is amazing. This is going to change everything. And then you drink the whole thing and you think, maybe not so much. And of course, it happened a long time ago with audiolingualism, which really did change the way that languages were taught. The classroom changed. Students were suddenly sitting in booths, not at tables, and they were communicating. It was not lockstep anymore, or it didn't have to be, that the students could work by themselves. I'd be interested to know about other countries, but in Japan, I haven't seen a language lab for a long time. And this is a very up-to-date one in this photo. It's got computer screens. I'm sure they still exist, but they're certainly not the main way that we teach languages. And another revolution was coming just, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. I write books, and like many people who write books and many publishers, we were told that the iPad was going to change everything. Printed textbooks would be a thing of the past. Students would carry a single tablet and all of their textbooks would be on there, everything they needed. And people spent a lot of money gearing up for this, and we were all ready for this, and it just somehow didn't happen. We drifted back to, well, we never really drifted away from printed textbooks. So when we think about the future, I think it's tempting to think about, hover cars and brain implants and all kinds of weird and wonderful things. And that's important, because if you want to have an idea of what's possible, then you need to think about everything that's possible. But if you want to get an accurate view of what the future is going to be like, you also need to think about the things that are not going to change. What's going to be the same here now as it was, or what's going to be the same in 10 years as it is now. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So I think when we think about the future now, certainly in 2021, and certainly having watched Gert's keynote, the focus is technology. We're thinking very much about how technology is going to change our lives, and rightly so, because it already has done, and it's doing so continuously. Take this conference, for example. Would this have been technically possible 10 years ago? It might have been, but maybe not. Certainly not 15 years ago. Yeah. And technology has changed every aspect of our lives. I like running. I've always liked running since I was young. I've never been any good at it, but I always liked it. This is a photo I dug up of me when I was 16, running in the village fun run. This was back in the day when fun runs were a new thing. And back in those days, running was a fairly simple affair. You put your shoes on, you looked at your watch. I kind of remember back in the day, I had one of those diver's watch bezels, the ones where you set the time so you can see what time you started. So you set your watch, you run, and then you finish running and you look at your watch and you note whether you were faster or slower than before. And that was it, really. If you wanted to know how far you'd run, I was 16, so I had to ask my dad to drive me around the route so that we could measure it. And that was it. It was a very simple affair. And I still run today. This is from a run I just did the other day, but it's a very different affair now. I'm wearing a watch that does a number of things. It does a crazy amount of things. The first thing it does is pipe music and audio announcements wirelessly into my ears. So as I'm running, it will tell me how fast I'm running, whether I'm below or above my goal, what my heart rate's doing. I have this incredible amount of data. And then when I finish the run, I get a deluge of data and analysis and comparisons with former runs and whether I'm meeting my goals, all of these kind of things. And when you think about it like that, it's just a completely different thing. What I'm doing now is completely different to what I was doing back then. But of course it isn't. It's the same basic activity. The fundamentals of the running are still the same. It still makes you sweat. It still hurts when you run uphill. It's still painful to be out of breath. The running hasn't changed. And I think with sports and with language learning, I think there are some interesting parallels. And I thought of three points that apply to both. One is that the development of technology has encouraged more people to do it. I think there's an app, I don't know whether you know it, called Couch to 5K, which is designed to encourage people to run. And there are language learning apps that will get people interested in learning languages. So that's one thing that's happened in both fields. The other thing, or another thing, is that the people who are doing it very seriously, the people who are committed to it, have much, much better tools available to them than they did before, and will get better results because of that. The third thing they have in common is, again, the fundamentals haven't changed. Learning a language is still learning a language. Running is still running. Cycling is still cycling. There's a well-known saying in cycling, which is that it never gets any easier, you just get faster. And that's, again, it's true of language learning. The stuff that we have now hasn't really made it any easier to learn a language. It's just made us more effective, provided we are committed to the challenge. So today I want to have a look at what we might think of as what are the fundamentals of language learning and language education. So I'm thinking both about teaching and learning here. I came up with 5 of these, by the way, and I came up with more, but I narrowed them down. I'm hoping that at the end, if we have time for discussion, that people will come up with some more. So the first thing that is fundamental to language learning is that the nature of the task, what is involved. And what is involved in language learning, the core of language learning is this. It's a massive investment of time and effort over a prolonged period. Again, similar to sport or similar to learning a musical instrument. Now, apps can help us they can be a tool that helps us with this challenge, but they don't change the nature of the challenge. Taking just for example, the example of time, it's kind of difficult to give numbers on how long it takes people to learn a foreign language, but there's some interesting data from the FSI, the Foreign Services Institute in the United States. They teach English to diplomats and people who need it for their jobs. And they do give figures. They estimate that they break languages down into 4 classes. A class 1 language is one that's similar to your own. And a class 4 language is one that's very different to your own. And they estimate that to reach a level of, I think they call it limited working proficiency in a class 4 language, you need to spend 1,410 hours or something like that of classroom study. That's without the self-study. Now, I can't see any changes in technology that are going to be able to reduce that. It's still going to require that time, and it's still going to require that commitment. Some of you may be thinking, but what about Elon Musk's Neuralink? And that's a good question. I was originally going to say that if Neuralink, for anybody who doesn't know, is the idea of brain implants. It's an interface between the human brain and the internet. And I think maybe that might be a game changer. I think it's a long way off, but even if it happened, I'm still not so sure, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So the second fundamental, I think, is that the barriers to success, and what I mean here is the things that make learning a language difficult. I'm referring to my own country here, but if you wanted to think about something that almost every adult has failed at some point in their life, in my country, but I'm guessing in other English-speaking countries too, learning a foreign language would probably be quite high on the list. Everybody learns them in school, and very, very few people succeed. And the reason people don't succeed is because it's difficult, and because it requires that huge investment of time and effort. I think if you were to ask people if you played a word association game, what words do you think of when you think of language learning? I'm guessing language educators, language schools and institutions would want you to come up with words like this. And these are the ones you'll see on the pamphlets. But as a language learner myself, if somebody asked me, they have done, this is why I know it, my 3 words would be quite different. These would be my 3 words. And these are barriers to success. Making a mistake in a foreign language is embarrassing, and I can't see any way that technology would be able to make it not embarrassing for me. Being frustrated at not being able to say what I want to say is again something technology might be able to tell me how to say it, but I would still be frustrated that I didn't know how to say it. Confusion may be taken away, but again, I'll come back to that a little bit later. One thing to remember that's important, I think, to remember is that I'm just going to press my button before I forget. Another thing that's important to remember is that technology has actually added another barrier, which is a barrier for all of us these days, which is the evil that is distraction. So having your phone tell you that it's time to practice French and throwing the French exercises up on your screen is great. But if your phone then tells you that your friends just posted a Facebook of their new baby, a photo on Facebook of their new baby, and you think, oh, we had a new baby, I better have a look at that, then that's not going to be conducive to language learning at all. So I don't think the barriers to success will disappear because they're human. They're inherently human, and I can't see any way that technology can deal with them. If you think about success in language learning, we sometimes talk about the 3 M's. If we were doing a live thing, I would ask people to shout out what the 3 M's are, but we're not. So I'll tell you the 3 M's that lead to success in language learning are motivation, motivation, and motivation. And it's meant to be, it's a kind of a half joke, but it's really not a joke. That's really the crux of the matter. Motivated learners will succeed. It doesn't matter what resources they have or don't have. And the opposite is true. Unmotivated learners won't succeed, no matter how good the situation is. I'm sure over there in Korea you have the same thing, but I know people in Japan who, I have a friend I was with today who's lived in Japan for 15 years, who lives in a family where everybody else speaks Japanese and still doesn't speak Japanese. I mean, it's difficult to imagine a more ideal situation for language learning, but even then, if you don't have the motivation to do it, then it simply doesn't happen. So the third fundamental, I think, is teachers. And this, I think you could argue, well, we won't need teachers in the future. Well, there are 2 answers to that. The first answer probably would be, well, we don't really need them now. Going back to the idea of a motivated learner would be able to succeed without a teacher. It's not a necessary ingredient. But I don't think it's as simple as that, because I think one of the things that COVID showed us, I think almost every country in the world that I know of has had school closures, and school closures have highlighted 3 of the roles, the main roles of schools, what schools are there for. And one of them, of course, is education, but I'm not even sure that that's the main one. The other 2 are childcare, in that it allows parents to work, and socialization, in that it allows children to learn how to interact with their peers. And in some ways, the education has to carry on through online learning and technology like the technology that we're using now. But they haven't been able to replace you've still got the childcare problem, and you've still got the socialization problem. So in other words, you need schools. And a school, the whole idea of a school, the whole structure of a school is that it's based around the idea of a teacher and a class. That's how the socialization takes place. Even if you say, well, are you in a university, you don't have the childcare element. Well, that's true, but you still have the socialization and you still have the organization of learning. You're still going to need a teacher. It doesn't matter. I can't see any way of structuring the activity that would fit with who we are as humans that would remove the need for a teacher. So that's my third fundamental. So the fourth one, this is kind of a broad one, the idea of interaction, that language is inherently, it's fundamentally a cooperative endeavor. Learning is fundamentally a cooperative endeavor. Of course, it's possible to learn by yourself, but that's not the way that most people learn. And there's not a great deal of point in learning a language. Again, you can learn a language by yourself, but at the end of the day, you have to have somebody to use it with.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh. Siri, I never asked you for anything. Siri when you don't want her. So technology has facilitated interaction in a different way, and that's been really interesting. But I think everybody's seen over the last year that there's something missing. It's just not the same. This is great, but given a choice between this and sitting in a room with all of you, I would choose the latter 100 times over, and not just because Siri might join in when I don't want her to, although she could do in the room as well. I think that I was looking at the Discord discussion the other day, and Wayne Malcolm appeared on the discussion, and I think Michael typed, "Wayne, good to see you," or "Wayne, you're here," or something like that. And I thought, I can see that. I can see how that would happen when in the real world, when Wayne walked into a room and Michael said, "Hey, Wayne, you're here." And I thought the Discord it's nice, it's poor imitation. It's not the same thing. So we need human interaction. I think Gerd talked about this. I think even if we had a situation, we were talking, I think he was talking about the ear, the kind of instant real-time translation, where somebody says something to you and a machine translates it and tells you what they've said. Again, that would be handy, but you'd be losing the element, because the voice you would be hearing wouldn't be the voice of that person, and you wouldn't actually be speaking directly to that person. It would be like somebody else telling you what the person had said. And so whatever we do and whatever changes technology brings along, there's going to have to be some kind of interaction. And this kind of links back to what I was just saying about socialization in schools. Socialization comes about through interaction. If you had school classes set up where the students just sat behind a computer screen and worked independently, what would be the point of them being there? Although I guess you could still have the childcare option. But B, you would be losing the socialization, because the interaction is the whole point. And I think that is a fundamental that I don't think we can lose. I don't see that there's any way that we would be able to get rid of that. My final one is the need for English. So thinking about that idea of translation software. Back in the day, translation software was a joke. It was ridiculous, and many of us thought that it would never be feasible. It's getting really good. It's getting better and better. It's still, I can still spot it when students use it. We can still see translation software, but maybe only because it's producing language that I know that they couldn't produce. But even if we assume that at some point it's going to be perfect, we say we have perfect translation software. So does that mean that we don't need to learn languages anymore? And I don't think it does. I think for two reasons. The first one made me think about this. Back in the 1970s, my father used to work in a bank. This was back in the days where banks were institutions that provided services to communities, not parasites that leached off society. But that's a different topic. But when I remember he moved, he finished working in one branch and he was moved to another branch. And his colleagues bought him a leaving present, and it was an electronic calculator. And he'd never seen one before, and we'd never seen one before. He brought it home and he showed it to us. I must have been about 10, I would guess. And my dad assured me that it was impossible for this thing to be wrong. So obviously, a 10-year-old, the first thing you're going to do is try and prove that wrong, and that didn't work very well. And when you get bored of doing that, the second thing you want to do is learn how to write dirty words on it. So you turn it upside down and it reads naughty words. But as these became more popular, people began to say, hang on a minute, we don't need to learn maths anymore. All the stuff the times table, why would you need to learn your times tables? Because why would you need to learn addition and subtraction? Because you can do it instantly. And this was a lot of very clever people thought that this would be the case. But of course, it wasn't the case, was it? We still learn maths in school. Kids still learn their times tables. They still learn addition and subtraction. One of the things that I thought Gerd talked about that was very interesting was the idea of moving up the ladder. So we allow technology to take care of the things that we don't want to do so that we can push ourselves further. And I think the result has been, certainly when I go back to the UK and I visit schools, the mathematics that kids are doing in schools these days is way beyond anything that I ever did. I guess it's quite a long time ago. But one thing that has certainly not happened is that mathematics education has certainly not disappeared. If anything, it's become even more important. So the fact that we have a tool that can do something for us doesn't mean that we don't still need to learn how to do that thing. And the second reason is even more fundamental. I think education is not only about utility. Humans are curious, humans are creative. Even if, I think if you think about education, there are two aspects to education. There's the process and there's the product. And if we look back at our own educations, I think most of us would probably agree that what stayed with us was the process, it's not the product. Somebody was telling me recently that when you go to medical school, you're warned on the first day that roughly 50% of the things that you learn on your course will turn out to be wrong. And I'm guessing the same as in something like physics would be the same. Everything that you're learning may turn out to be completely wrong. So does that mean we don't need to learn it? No, of course it doesn't, because the process of going through the process of learning it, that's what education is. It's not the result that comes out at the end. So going back for a minute to Neuralink, I was thinking if you could connect your brain up to the internet and be fluent in every language in the world, can you just try for a minute to imagine how that would feel? It would feel nice in one way, but you would have absolutely zero sense of achievement. There would have been no process. You would have no understanding of how language works. You would have no understanding of the process of learning. And I thought about this for a long time, and I possibly would want to do it, but I might say, for example, okay, implant the languages that I'm never going to learn, but leave French and Chinese because I want to have a go at those. Don't put those in there. Let me do those myself. And I think that that will always be the case. And I think if you think about particularly the way education is done in institutional settings, I think this idea of a teacher and a classroom and students, so much of that is fundamentally human that I don't see any way that it can change. So COVID has, of course, changed our world. It's made everything. It's turned our worlds upside down. That's why I'm talking to you in the way that I'm talking to you now. And it has to be said that COVID has thrown up some marvelous tools that most of us probably never even knew about. I think everybody I've spoken to has said that teaching online has given them insights that they didn't have before. There are things that you can do on Zoom better than you can do in a classroom. But I haven't found any teachers who said I actually prefer teaching on Zoom. I think everybody still feels that there's something missing. We have had students who've said that they prefer learning on Zoom. This is generally for one of two reasons. One, because they live a long way from the university, or secondly, because they are actually precisely the kind of person who needs to come to the university, who needs the kind of socialization that they're not getting. So it's actually, I think it's actually bad for them. The interesting thing about my own institution was that we experimented with lots of different models. I guess this was the same for a lot of people, but we were completely thrown into this with a week's notice. Right from April, everything is online. We had part-time teachers who quit, who said, the older ones especially, said, "I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that. I'm quitting." And we experimented with lots of different ways of doing it. And by the time we got to the second semester, we found that what we'd come back to was we were using the technology to do the things that we do in the classroom. So we were doing group work using breakout rooms, but even though we're doing it in breakout rooms, it's still group work. We were actually structuring the lessons in the same way. And that wasn't because it was easy for us or because it was more comfortable. It was because that was what worked. That was what met the needs of both the teachers and the students. So I'll finish up with a quote from Gerd's thing. The thing that I took away from his talk more than anything was this idea of cherishing being human. And I think that the people, and all of us, the people I'm talking with now, for us, we have there are three kind of key elements to what we do: language, teaching, and learning. And I think all of those are so fundamentally human that no matter what changes we bring in, there's always going to be that those three things are going to remain fundamentally human, and I think we will cherish them even more in the future than we do now. So I want to finish with not really I mean, I'm happy to take questions, but I would much well, I would be very interested to hear anybody else's ideas about additions to my very short list. I've listed them there just to make it easy for you to remember what I talked about. But if anybody has, what about this? You haven't mentioned this. I think that would be very interesting to hear people's opinions. But obviously, I'm very happy to take questions about what I spoke about as well. So, Michael, can I hand over to you to be the MC? Michael, are you there?
Looks like you caught Michael taking a nap.
Or feeding the cat. I haven't done one of these before, so I'm not sure how we normally do it. Shall I be I'll be the MC. Then I guess somebody just unmute yourself and speak would be the easiest.
I think in the nature of the task, I think you were talking about how really it requires a commitment. Is that correct?
Yes, a commitment of time and effort. Yeah.
Right. That really struck me. Just from my own language learning experiences, I just thought, yeah, without that commitment, I guess, of course, it ties back to what you said with the 3 M's, but that commitment, it's without that, we're kind of sunk. I don't have anything more to sort of add to what you said, but that was sort of my thought on the nature of the task part.
Thank you for raising that. I think, and also it's the one thing that I can't see technology removing the need for, beyond unless you go to as far as Neuralink. I can see better and better tools, but you're still going to need the commitment. Like somebody who doesn't run in 2021 is not going to make any progress than somebody who didn't run in 1980. The tools are out there, but if you don't use them, then they may as well not be there.
Right. Right.
I have a question.
Sure.
Curtis Kelly has a question. So some things have made a big change for me, like Zoom, not so much for teaching, but for being able to be here right now,
Yeah.
attending conferences all over the world. But in relation to teaching English, I've changed over the last 40 years. I've been teaching for 40 years. And there's some things that have changed me, and I imagine you have too. I don't imagine, I agree, there's nothing is going to revolutionize our field, but there must have been some things that changed your way of thinking or teaching. I'd like to hear what those might be.
That's a very interesting question. I think there are things that have changed, but it's not unidirectional, because there are things that I've changed and then changed back. Because, I thought, well, everybody says we should do this, so I've tried this, and I think, that doesn't work, I'm going to go back. When I say that I haven't changed, what I meant was, I had this image of, if you took me out of I did my Cambridge CELTA course back in 1992, and I was thinking, what would have happened if you'd taken me out of that class and plopped me down in one of the university English classes at the university where I teach now? There would be nothing here that I wouldn't recognize. There would be, different teachers would be doing it in different ways, but the fundamental thing would be basically the same. My own teaching, I think, has, as I say, it bounced around might be a better, it's probably not a very professional way to express it, but I would say it's bounced around more than that it's changed. And I think most of my changes have been informed by my own learning. I changed a lot when I learned Japanese. Understanding the student's perspective, I think, was the biggest thing that changed for me, more than any real changes in the field.
That's a good point. I think I should say too, for me, the changes I've made have more come from just growing, becoming more understanding than from any particular technique.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think probably my teaching has changed in not so good ways. I mean, I'm older. I probably don't have the enthusiasm or the energy that I had when I was younger. I still like to think I have some, but you know, thinking back, you know, when everything was new and I was just so excited to be there, that was maybe something. So I don't think it's not like medicine. If you look at the world of medical technology, there's nothing now that's not better than what it was back in 1980. Do you know what I mean? Medicine doesn't move forward and then move back. It moves forward, like engineering, all of those fields move forward. But I think in education, we do tend to, it's not unidirectional. Certainly, I don't think for any individual teacher, it'll be unidirectional.
David, can I put in a comment here?
Sure.
Earlier this week, my wife and I put together some IKEA furniture, and as some of you may know, that's a true test of a marriage, and it certainly was for us as well. As we assembled that, I was able to use a ratchet handle screwdriver.
Right.
Now this is what I hear you talking about. That technology is not changing what we do, but perhaps it's changing how we do it. So we now have better tools for doing the interaction. Now, one thing that I'm looking at right now is in EFL, there's always a certain amount of inauthentic interaction going on, because in my classroom, I have Korean students talking to other Korean students, and they actually should be using their first language. There's no reason for them to use their second language, except the fact that they're all together in a classroom. So, you know, that's kind of what we have to practice. But with Zoom, we could conceivably get my Korean students talking to Professor Plata's, Filipino students, and then they do have a need to use English as a common language.
Yeah.
Now, that means that the interaction is basically the same, but we've come up with a better way of doing it, because now we're doing something that is actually more authentic.
I agree, but I'm quite a staunch defender of inauthentic practice, because I think if, for example, if I was a student of Korean, for example, and I was going to speak with Korean, students, before I did that, I would want to practice with other English speakers so that I can get my Korean and we can understand each other. I need to practice. So I think if you were to do that, okay, we're going to connect with a classroom in the Philippines, I think that would be a special event more. It would be, you said there's no reason for Korean students to use English with each other. But if you think about it, there's no reason for them not to either, because it's a human language. When I was, I think people need to step away from that idea of, there's no reason for me to do this. When I moved to New Zealand after I lived in Japan for a few years, and I found that I was losing my Japanese because I wasn't using it. And I was working in school in New Zealand. There was a staff room, and the guy next to me was married to a Japanese woman, and he'd lived in Japan. And I said this to him, and he said, "You know what? I'm losing my Japanese too. How about me and you use Japanese? And I said, yeah, sure, that would be cool. Let's do that." And we started doing that. And then other teachers saw, and they said, "Oh, I lived in Japan for a year. Can I join you?" And we ended up with this group of people who said, "Why are we using Japanese?" Because we're learning Japanese. Almost every, I talk about running, and I like running, I like cycling. When you run up and down hills, timed again and again and again. We don't do that in a real race. You do that in order to prepare for the real thing. So I think authentic practice certainly has a role, but I don't think that everything we do has to be authentic. It's just my opinion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. I appreciate it.
I mean, you're definitely right that Zoom has thrown up these incredible opportunities. We had it before. Skype has been able to do this since I'm not sure when, but I think the biggest change this time is that all of us, even the technophobes, have been forced onto the platform. So now, I don't think there's a teacher anywhere in the world who's not an expert on Zoom. We all know how to use it. So nobody's frightened of it anymore. And I think that will be a benefit, a positive effect of COVID.
As a follow-up and an extension of that, I think maybe it depends on the teacher goals and the overall goals. Because, for example, if you're trying to measure where the interaction is happening, for example, between the Japanese and the Filipino students, and you want to know, is it comprehensible input from the very get-go, and they're able to do just so much interaction, and you know that's the goal and you're trying to get to the end goal and looking at process kind of ways of doing it, there's also everything that you mentioned as far as, well, let's just continue practicing amongst ourselves and then let's check in at the end of the semester. So you could approach it both ways, where there's continual check-ins with each other, authentic practice, or just how the teachers themselves, as well as the way the curriculum's written up for organizational goals.
You need the full range, don't you? Again, going back to sports, I mean, every sport and musical instruments are another good example. They will all have realistic practice. They will have drills. They will have all, a whole range of different types of practice. And I think that language learning is the same. I mean, it's very difficult to do it without any authentic practice. But I think if everything you did was authentic, that would be kind of scary. I would, certainly if I was learning a foreign language, I would want time to practice it by myself. I remember learning Japanese, we did a lesson of, the book is on the table, the book is under the table, the pen is on the book, the pen is next to the book. And, a purist might say, well, none of that's authentic. You can see where the book is. I can see where the book is. And I would say, shut up and leave me alone. I'm practicing how to say where the pen is. I need this practice so that I can use the language later. Are you an idiot? I'm not. I understand that this isn't authentic, but it doesn't mean it's not valuable. Just my opinion.
Such good stuff. Such good stuff. We have a few minutes left. If no one has a burning question, I'd like to just pop in and insert myself because I can, because I'm
Go for it.
I wanted to say something that pops into this discussion a little bit about a conversation that I witnessed in a class I had pre-COVID, in the pre-COVID days so long ago. And this was a class where I had a mix of Korean students. I work in Korea, so it's mostly Korean students always. But then there were Malaysian students and Chinese students and all of this other stuff. And what I did, which is genius, because I'm a genius. It's not genius. But what I did was I set them up to do the same task in their own cultural groups, and then I mixed them up, and then I mixed them up again. And then I had them report on these things. And at first they were like, well, I'm not, okay, we get the first part where we can just talk and they can talk in their own language. And then the other one, they go, okay, well, we have to use English. And we're not sure about that. And then the other one's like, there's too many people and our English is too confused. Near the end of this semester, I watched a conversation with 2 Malaysians, I think I've got it right, 2 Malaysians, 3 Koreans, and a person from Uzbekistan. And the Uzbekistan student, Saida, was explaining to everyone how there's more than one form of Islam.
Right.
And their minds, I watched their minds blow up in their heads. They had no idea that what? But I was watching this, I kept my mouth shut, I sat at the desk, and I did a little happy dance in my seat to watch this learning going on, because you could see it was all so brilliant. And they may have used their phones at some point. I didn't care. It was great. I loved it. It was good. That's all.
If I just be very clear, I'm not arguing against authentic practice and authentic use of language. It's essential. What I'm arguing against is the idea that everything that we do in the classroom has to be authentic.
Of course. Yeah.
It would be. Can I just make one other comment? I've just noticed people are sending things in chat, and because I've been presenting and kind of focusing on this, I haven't looked at any of them. So, is there anything I've missed in the chat that maybe somebody's posted a question or a comment that I missed?
Let's just have a look. If you have posted a question in the chat for David, Bob, maybe just
or a comment,
or a comment that you because I've been jabbering with Curtis here there. Yeah, Lucinda's got it right. It's mostly us not being nice. Not being. It's fine. Good. Love it. Yeah. So Such a nice discussion, David Barker. Thank you so much for this. If you want to,
I have a thank you slide. Mm.
oh, there it is. The thank you. Oh, it's not a waving. I have the gift that's the waving Korean, not Korean, Japanese student.
Well, Zoom didn't let me down, and I remembered to press the button on my camera, so all is good in my world. And my green screen didn't collapse.
Welcome to the new normal, people. Welcome to the new normal. Anyways, thank you so much, David Barker. If you want to continue the conversation, I will put the link in here to the Discord server. You can, even if you don't, if you have something else to do on a Friday night at 9 o'clock, I don't know what that could possibly be, but if
it's not 9 o'clock on a Friday night for everybody, is it?
Yeah, well, this is it, right? You're welcome to go about that. You can hook up with him on Discord and do that.
Can I just say I'm not very good with Discord. I'm not entirely sure how it works. So, if you message me and I don't reply, be persistent, because I probably just haven't figured it out.
We'll help the technologically infirm gentleman get to Discord. It will be fine. If you want to stick around, we have a movie coming up in 14 minutes. It's going to be great in this room. For now, we say goodbye. Go to Discord. Go and enjoy your weekends. Thank you for coming. Love you all, sort of. And David, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. I have to go home and help get the kids. I'm hoping they're already in bed, but I have to go home and show willing.
Kids, what is this? I have to go take care of my kids thing. Okay. Very good, sir. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much. Nice to see everybody. Bye-bye.